where did these people learn to drive? Today, we're taking a look at the top 15 worst drivers on planet Earth. Number 15. Worst place to stop. When you're driving on a highway where speed limits are higher than on normal roads, it's especially important to pay particular attention to which lane you're in and when you're approaching your turn. If you miss it, it could result in you needing to travel several more miles to turn around, but sometimes this is just something you have to do to remain safe. The absolute worst thing you can do is stop in the middle of a highway and try to make a maneuver when there's traffic approaching from behind. But amazingly, this is what a Chinese driver attempted to do in 2018. As you can see from the footage, it was too late by the time they realized they had missed the right-hand turn. But instead of continuing on as most drivers would, they came to a complete stop and began trying to turn off. The vehicles behind them, which were traveling at quite some speed, had no choice but to swerve in an attempt to avoid the car. And this resulted in a couple of extremely dangerous accidents. The first truck only just gets out of the way in time, but is unable to handle the momentum and falls over onto its side, releasing all of its cargo onto the road. Then another truck, which appeared to have plenty of time to evade an incident, also finds itself swaying, and it only just manages to stop in time. Meanwhile, the oblivious driver finally managed to join the slip road and continued on with their journey. Number 14. Taking it for a test crash. It can be tricky when it's time to buy a new car. Every brand and model behaves slightly differently, and since it's going to be your vehicle for the next few years at least, it's important to find one that's comfortable and that you feel comfortable driving. That's why showrooms allow you to sit in demonstration vehicles and take them for test drives before you commit to a purchase. But no one in this North Indian Hyundai dealership could have known what was about to happen next. A girl had gone in with her parents to get her very first car, and the salesman invited her to sit inside of one of the vehicles. She switched on the engine to get a feel for it, but somehow managed to slam her foot down on the accelerator too. As the car lurched forward, she panicked, and instead of hitting the brake, she pushed her foot down on the accelerator even harder. The car drove forward, smashed through the showroom window, and crashed down from the first-floor building into the parking lot below, and continued on into a wall where it collided with two other vehicles. Amazingly, no one was hurt in the incident, but the girl, according to reports, left with a bill of around $10,000 for the damage she caused. Number 13. Wrong way. There are a few rules that, no matter where you are in the world, you have to adhere to on the roads, the main one being the side of the road which you drive on. In most countries, it's the right, but in some cases you drive on the left instead, and this can cause confusion, especially for visitors from other countries where it's the opposite. Nevertheless, you'd expect at least the residents of a country to be more than familiar with where they should be driving, but this isn't the case either. This footage was recorded from a dash camera of a van that was traveling along a dual carriageway in England, where they drive on the left, and soon the van encounters an elderly lady who was driving her vehicle on the wrong side. He tried to stop in her path to warn her of the danger, but she ignored him, swerved around him, and continued on her way. Apparently, she was eventually stopped by police who questioned her and found out that she was confused and didn't even realize she had done anything wrong. It was such a potentially deadly incident, however, that she had to hand in her driving license on the spot and was banned from driving altogether until she passed a test. Number 12. Tight turns. Sometimes, particularly when you're driving along rural roads, you can be left wondering who actually designed the streets with such tight bends and turns. In a small car, they can be difficult enough to traverse, but when you're in a much larger vehicle, it only takes one wrong move for things to become far more dangerous. The car in this video is just about to make a turning onto a street behind a truck that's carrying logs to a nearby processing facility. Even when the flatbed turns around the first corner, it's clearly got too much speed and slightly tilts into the bend. It corrects itself though, and you could be forgiving for thinking that after that close escape, the driver would slow down and be more careful. But instead, he assumes he can get away with anything. As the driver with the dash cam follows down the street a few cars behind, you can see the truck driver taking another bend at a much faster speed than seems safe. Later on, however, he makes yet another sharp turn and doesn't get away with it. The trailer starts to fall over and suddenly collapses onto the road, sending logs rolling in all directions. It required a crane and several diggers to help clean up the mess, something that could have been prevented had it not been for a reckless driver. Number 11. Shoulda got a bigger truck. We've all been there. A shopping visit at the local store has gotten out of hand, and there's way too much to fit into the trunk of your car. So you're left with having to try to safely fit everything on the seats and the footwells for a precarious drive home. Sometimes, though, it's impossible to find enough space for everything you're trying to transport, and you can either leave some of it behind or try to get away with it. This video, which was recorded in India, shows the length some people will go to avoid an extra trip, and it ends badly for the truck driver involved. He simply got way too many sacks for this small truck, and they're stacked precariously high. It almost inevitably starts leaning to the left, and all it takes is a slight bend in the road to send everything tumbling to the ground. Everyone else holds back in bemusement at how the driver thought he'd managed to keep things under control, and because of his stupidity, no one was willing to help him tip the truck back onto its wheels, and he was in for a long evening to try to fix the mess. Number 10. You spin me right round. This dashcam footage was recorded from a car that was traveling along the I-95 in southern Florida in 2018, and to begin with, everything seems like it does just every other day. A white car comes speeding up in the lane to the right, though, just as the car in front is attempting to change lanes without using its indicators, and it's forced to swerve back out of the way. Unfortunately, because the silver car is traveling so fast, the driver is unable to keep it under control, and it begins to spin around. In just seconds, it's facing the wrong way and is hurtling backwards along with the rest of the traffic. He manages to bring the car to a stop, and fortunately, other road users are able to slow down and stay out of his way. He turns his car to the proper way around and sets off again. But failing to learn from his lesson, he continues to change lanes without using his signals. It's a miracle that he didn't crash into anyone, and that the only consequence of his action was that a few cars had to slow down. If this had happened in worse weather or when visibility was reduced, it would have almost certainly have resulted in a serious accident. Number 9. Hill parking. Driving up a steep incline can be notoriously tricky, especially for new drivers, but even people who are experienced behind the wheel can make the occasional mistake. Luckily, this usually causes nothing more than a slight holdup for cars behind, but in this video, you'll see just how destructive things can be if you do something wrong on a hill. The owner of this Porsche Taycan, which retails for more than $100,000, has returned home after a trip and is focused on making the right turn into his driveway. It seems as if he's paying far too much attention to the steering, however, and has forgotten about the incline. He stops midway to reassess his position. After a moment, he hits the gas, and instead of gently moving towards his house, he suddenly has too much speed, turns the wrong direction, crashes into his neighbor's vehicle, and then falls off the side of a hill and lands in a stationary car below. It's about as bad as this maneuver could have gone, and caused tens of thousands of dollars worth of damage to his car alone. Luckily, though, there were no people around at the time, and the driver was able to get out of the Porsche with only a few bumps and grazes, not to mention a massive bruise to his ego. We are constantly adding more people to the Top 5's production team to bring you all the best content. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on and hit the like button. Number 8. Taking a shortcut. Nowadays, so many cars have cameras that record what's happening on the road ahead of them that there's little debate as to who's responsible for an accident. Even when a car is stationary, the camera is still recording. And in this next video, it's the only way the owner of the car could be sure why he returned to find it crushed beneath another one. It had been parked in a hospital parking lot. At first, the owner couldn't believe his luck that he'd managed to find a bay so close to the entrance. He soon regretted his choice, though, because when he reviewed the footage, he saw that another car that had just left the hospital parking lot was driving on the main street beyond the hill, lost control, and careened across the grass into the parked car. Needless to say, the crash caused extensive damage, and neither car was fit to be driven away afterwards. The immediate concern was for the driver of the other vehicle, who was 96 years old, but luckily paramedics and a fire crew were close by and were able to safely release him and took him to the hospital to be assessed. Amazingly, no one else was injured, but it would have surely been a different story if anyone was sat in the car where it was recorded from. Number 7. Perfect place to turn. It can be one of the most frustrating things as a driver to realize that you've missed your turning. And everyone has thought about breaking the rules of the road to save the extra 10 minutes it would take to turn around. Most avoid this temptation, however, because it usually isn't safe, especially if you're on a highway with other vehicles that are traveling fast. The driver of this bus, though, felt he had no choice but to make an insane maneuver after missing the turning he was meant to take. According to reports, the dilemma he faced was that there's a tunnel a little further along the highway that doesn't have enough clearance for a bus as tall as his to safely pass through. He had to make a choice of either trying to escape through the tunnel or turning around into the missed turn, and he chose to go with the latter option. You can only imagine the annoyance and confusion of the other drivers as they saw him begin to turn around and drive the wrong way down the road. As you can see, it causes a massive traffic jam behind him, and every car takes any opportunity they can to drive past. Luckily, the bus driver managed to drive safely without any harm to himself or his passengers, but he was later tracked down by police who banned him from driving a bus again until he had completed a safety training course. Number 6. Stay in your lane. With so many drivers on the roads around the world, it's vital that everyone sticks to the rules. This ensures everyone gets to their destination as quickly and as safely as possible. But there's always someone who thinks they're above the law and can do whatever they want. It's unfortunately not too uncommon to see someone changing lane without warning and creating a potentially hazardous situation. But even if you're someone who does this without caring about what it does to other vehicles and drivers around you, there's probably one time when you keep to the rules as much as possible, when there's a cop car nearby. In this video, however, a driver's cavalier attitude to road safety is caught on camera, even in the presence of the authorities. The car with the dash cam pulls up at the intersection alongside the police car and makes a legal turn to the left, which is also where the cops go. Suddenly, the truck that's also made the turn doesn't stick to the left-hand lane and instead forces itself ahead and straddles both of the lanes without giving any room to the other vehicles, and eventually settles on the right-hand lane. Unsurprisingly, the police car is then seen speeding up along the street behind the truck and later pulled them over to have a word with them about appropriate behavior on the road. Number 5. Is that a dent? While every car has equal right to driving along a street, you can't help but give extra space to vehicles that have dents or scratches on them, because that's usually a good sign that the driver behind the wheel isn't necessarily as careful as you are. It's rare in most places around the world to see a car that's severely damaged and still driving, mainly because it's usually illegal, but this doesn't always stop reckless drivers from trying their luck. This video was recorded in New York City in 2017, and you can only imagine what's happened before it begins for this car to be in such a state. It's missing the entire front bumper, has scratches and dents all along the side, and massive cracks beneath the trunk. Normally, you'd think the car is well overdue for a trip to a workshop, but the driver's still intent on using it. Perhaps it's the pressure of driving while someone's recording, that he's stressed after an accident, or he's panicking, but the way he drives to maneuver in the street seems to explain how his car got into this mess in the first place. It's a surprise that someone who drives like that is even able to own a car, let alone drive it, and you can only hope that he was later pulled over by the cops and taken off the road for good. Number 4. Look before you turn. There are a number of places on a road where accidents are more likely to happen, and one of them is where a street intersects with a faster road and requires drivers to make a careful turn onto it. Usually, you'd be expected to wait at the end of the street until enough space opens up, but some drivers prefer to try their luck and creep into the road in an attempt to force a gap to open up for them. The problem is, if the other road users don't see you doing this, it can lead to dangerous consequences. This video was recorded by a helmet-mounted camera of a motorcyclist on a road with a speed limit of 60 miles an hour. The motorcyclist is traveling at just 45 miles an hour. But even though he's slower than the limit, he only just has enough time to avoid a potentially fatal accident. A car can be seen in a nearby road that's approaching this one, but when it gets into the intersection, it completely fails to stop. Instead, it continues into the main road and only narrowly misses the bike that has to swerve out of the way. It's a clear example of how important it is to stop and carefully approach junctions like that, and that you should only proceed once you've had a chance to properly assess the other road users that you need to give priority to. Number 3. Miss the tunnel. Different road users have different rules and potential hazards that they need to watch out for. It's arguably easiest driving a car because they're designed for the majority of people to use, whereas motorbikes aren't as safe and have different controls. And large trucks are probably the most difficult because they aren't as easy to maneuver, and you have to be aware of how tall and wide they are. Not all the roads are designed to accommodate all trucks, and it's quite common for drivers to have to avoid routes with tunnels or bridges that don't have enough clearance. Sometimes, though, they misjudge what's possible and end up heading towards a tunnel that they've had no chance of passing through. This video was recorded by a security camera on a Chinese highway in 2017. You can see that as the truck approaches the tunnel, it's going to be a tight squeeze, but the driver doesn't show any sign of slowing down. As he gets closer to the tunnel, it becomes clear that he does in fact have plenty of room to go through. But then things take an unexpected turn. For some reason, the truck manages to completely miss the tunnel altogether and instead drifts into the right and collides with the hill. It's such a huge impact that the front of the truck is thrown up into the air in a cloud of dust, and it's a miracle that the driver was able to get out of it alive. Number 2. There isn't room for the two of us. Driving for hours on end or when you're in a particular rush can cause people to do all sorts of strange things on the road. Normally, you'd expect everyone to at least have an objective in common, the fact that they all want to avoid having an accident at all costs. But even that sensibility gets forgotten sometimes. The driver with the dash cam appears to be driving along the road as normal, but what we don't see from the beginning is that the car behind him is sped up and is trying to overtake him. For some reason, he doesn't want this to happen and decides to speed up himself to make a maneuver more difficult. With the traffic heading in the other direction, the overtaking driver has no choice but to speed up even more and try to steer back onto the right-hand side of the road. Normally, you'd expect the dashcam driver to slow down so this can be done safely, but he doesn't even make an attempt to do so. Instead, the two cars crash into one another. The car in front collides with the parked vehicle and is sent spinning. It's only when this starts happening that the first car decides to slow down and stop. There's a lot of debate about who was actually wrong in this instance. The overtaking driver should arguably have picked a better spot to pass, and once he realized it wasn't safe, could have slowed down and rejoined behind the other car. Similarly, the car with the dashcam wouldn't have had to do much to slow down to allow the other car to safely get out of the way, so they're probably both as bad as each other. Number 1. Roadhogs. Etiquette on the roads differs between countries. There are some where virtually every driver is considerate of others, and where they'll help each other navigate through tricky roads. Whereas there are other countries where the attitude is better described as everyone being in it for themselves. This video was recorded on the streets of India and shows that the congested conditions can lead to people behaving in a reckless and dangerous way. The car filming the video is having difficulty driving along a two-way street because the cars traveling in the opposite direction have formed two lines on what should be one lane. It forces the car to drive onto the footpath to be able to proceed, and the cars at fault try to push their way back into the proper line of traffic. This, though, wasn't the craziest piece of footage recorded on that journey, because later on the driver found himself on a similar road. This time there were two cars driving alongside each other and traveling in the opposite directions. So one of them, instead of slowing down and correcting its position, goes around him, and so does the cyclist behind him. It's almost as if the idea of keeping to one side of the road is completely non-existent. And it's a wonder how anyone manages to get anywhere when others are behaving like that. Watch our binge-watching playlist if you'd like to watch all of our most popular top 15 videos. Grab a drink, grab a snack, and get ready to binge.